number 10 is the Smurl family. Between the years of 1974 to 1989, the Smurl family was subjected to some incredibly terrifying hauntings in their Pennsylvania home. Over the 15 years they lived here, Jack and Janet Smurl, along with the rest of the family, reported that their TV once burst into flames, their toilets would flush themselves, and that various electronics would stop working for no reason all the time. But it was at night that the family got truly terrified. They would hear the loud footsteps despite there never being an intruder, and a nauseating smell always filled the house, but only ever at night. Soon enough, things got even scarier. They began finding what appeared to be claw marks all over the bathroom, and then in 1985, a full-bodied apparition began haunting the halls and hovering over them while they were sleeping. The family named her Old Hag, and it seems that after a while the demon got bored of just watching the couple sleep, and so it began harassing them, and according to Janet, would routinely commit SA on both her and her husband. That was the final straw for the couple, and so they decided to bring in a priest to exorcise the demon out. But even after 50 exorcisms, the entity refused to tighten its grip on the house. So, fearing for their lives, the family finally moved out in 1989 and never looked back. Moving on to number 9, the Snektar family. In the 1980s, the Snektar family thought they had found the perfect home. But it wasn't until after they were all settled that they learned the house had operated as a mortuary for several decades since the 1920s. At first, everything seemed alright, but soon they discovered old equipment from the funeral home in their basement. This raised an eyebrow, but they brushed it off and didn't think much of it. That was until they uncovered that their backyard still contained many of the buried corpses, along with eerie photographs of the corpses hidden away in nooks and crannies. Soon they were being haunted by evil spirits, routinely hearing haunting noises, and even seeing full-bodied apparitions. The mother claims that when she would mop the basement, the water would turn red as if it were blood, or that she would catch objects flying around the room while lights would aggressively flicker. At that time, there were rumors circulating that the former funeral directors were guilty of necrophilia, which led to the house becoming haunted by an evil presence, seeking revenge on all that lived in the house. Moving on to number 8. The Cranmer family. Despite his wife's hesitance, Bob Cranmer was determined to buy his dream home and moved in with his family in 1988. However, it quickly became apparent they had moved into a house of horrors. Cranmer says that over the years he would watch helplessly as blood dripped from his walls and invisible hands assaulted him and his family, fearing each day that it might be his last. And finally, after 18 years, an exorcism in 2006 finally drove the demon away. But where did the haunting begin? Well, Cranmer believes it all started with Dr. James Mahan, a former tenant of the home. Dr. Mahan was an alcoholic who routinely performed illegal operations on women in his basement, but not because he was looking to help these women, because he had a deal with a demon. Cranmer says the demon who haunts the house is Moloch, a demon who feeds off of young sacrifices, and that Moloch had possessed Dr. Mahan in order to feed off his basement operations. Once Dr. Mahan died, there was no one left to please the demon, and so he tormented all the families who moved in after, hoping to be able to scare them into giving him what he wanted. Luckily, Mr. Cranmer was able to rid the house of Moloch, and his family escaped the torment.
Number 7 is the Serra da Abobora in the Amazon jungle. Deep within the Amazon jungle lies a spine-chilling spot. It's infamous for a haunting legend involving an ancient ghost named Urutau, I think. This spectral being supposedly lures unsuspecting souls with the mesmerizing melody of a beautiful bird song, but here's the catch. Once drawn near, dreadful things reportedly start to unfold. It's said that those who venture too close to this spirit face frightening and inexplicable occurrences. It's no wonder very few tread into this part of the Amazon. This eerie tale teaches us a sobering lesson that even in the midst of breathtaking places like in the Amazon, there might lurk spine-tingling mysteries best left undisturbed. disturbed. At number 6 is the Petropolis Museum. The Petropolis Museum, also known as the Imperial Museum of Brazil, has an eerie reputation that's tied to its 19th century origins. Constructed within the Grand Palace of Emperor Dom Pedro II, this site is believed to house the ghost of the former emperor himself. Visitors and staff reported sightings of this apparition, claiming to have witnessed his spectral figure moving through the halls, particularly after nightfall. This spectral presence has turned the Petropolis Museum into one of Brazil's most notorious haunted places. Despite its spine-chilling reputation, there remains a curious lure for those brave enough to explore its haunted corridors and experience the unsettling atmosphere firsthand. For those with a strong heart and a penchant for the supernatural, this haunted locale in Brazil might offer an unforgettable, albeit potentially hair-raising experience. At number 5 is the Brasilia City Hall. You know, the Brasilia City Hall might seem like just another government building in Brazil's federal district, but it has been said that this place, sitting right there in Brasilia, has a history that might make you think twice before wandering in alone. Legend has it that this city hall wasn't always a place for politicians and meetings. No, it was once a mortuary where they stored a bunch of bodies before they were laid to rest. And get this, the place burned down at one point, only to rise from the ashes like a phoenix. Now, the creepy stuff doesn't stop there, ladies and gentlemen. People have reported doors slamming shut out of the blue, cabinets making a racket, and windows closing without a soul touching them. Oh, and there's a story about a guy who got locked in a room all by himself while there wasn't a single other person around. Pretty spooky. At number 4 is the road to Petropolis from Rio de Janeiro. As you head down this road from Rio de Janeiro, this road has some spooky stories attached to it. People driving there have claimed to see a strange thing. A blonde lady on the side of the road. I mean, it doesn't sound so strange, but what is odd is that she seems to be signaling for help, pointing at a broken down car and a body lying nearby. Now, when folks stop to assist, they freak out because it's the same woman they just saw moments ago, now lying lifeless by the car. And here's the creepy part. Poof! She and the car vanish into thin air. It's left those drivers feeling pretty shaken up. So if you're planning to take that road, just keep your eyes peeled and stay sharp. You never know what strange things might happen along the way. At number 3 is the Dream Beach. The Dream Beach in Sao Paulo, Itzenheim, holds a chilling reputation among haunted spots in Brazil. Legend has it that the lingering spirits of a deceased couple haunt this very shore. Witnesses claim to have glimpsed these apparitions to spectral figures, their forms decayed, vanishing into thin air without a trace. Even the beach's maintenance crew attests to eerie occurrences, citing unexplained voices and unsettling noises resonating across the deserted expanse in the dead of night. The spectral setting serves as a cautionary tale, warning visitors to proceed with extreme caution, lest they too become entangled in the mysteries that shroud the Dream Beach. And at number 2 is the road to Victoria. Truckers often drive down the road to Victoria in Campos, Rio de Janeiro, but there's something eerie about it. Lots of drivers say they've seen ghosts while on this road. These spooky figures suddenly appear in front of the trucks, causing drivers to panic and hit the brakes to avoid hitting them. Now, what's really weird is that as soon as the trucks stop, these ghostly figures just vanish. People believe they might be the spirits of construction workers who perished while building the road. It's like they're stuck there, tied to the construction work they're used to. That would really suck. Imagine being forced to haunt the place you worked for the rest of your afterlife. Boy, oh boy. It's a pretty scary place, and lots of folks avoid driving there at night. It's the stories about these ghosts that make people think twice about taking that road. And coming in at number 1 is Snake Island in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Now, this place technically isn't haunted, but if you ask me, it's definitely the scariest place on this list. This remote island is home to the golden lancehead vipers, whose venomous bite packs a punch that's 5 times stronger than any snake found in Brazil. But they're not the only snakes around, as in fact, here is where the snake density reaches nightmarish proportions. Imagine 1 to 5 snakes lurking in every square meter. Why are they so fearsome? Well, blame it on geography. When Snake Island parted ways with mainland Brazil 11,000 years ago, these snakes were forced to confront evolution by becoming aerial assassins. Yes, that's right, with no terrestrial prey to feast upon, they mastered tree dwelling and developed a venom 5 times more potent than their mainland kin. This lethal venom can eliminate birds instantly and even, get this, melt human flesh. So the Brazilian government wisely bans entry to this reptilian Eden. very wisely. It's a chilling reminder that nature's adaptability can birth monsters even in the most unlikely places.
And we're starting off the list with La Noria in Chile. La Noria was a town located in the barren desert of Atacama. That's right, we have a ghost town on here, folks. A destination for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts from across the world. Maybe some of you are one of them. It used to be a mining town in the 1800s, but by the early 1900s, most of the residents had packed up and left, leaving their now crumbling homes and buildings behind. Now, the people who lived there led tough lives. They worked constantly, the climate was harsh, many of them died suddenly, and life expectancy was not high. This is perhaps why the cemetery is said to be the most haunted part of the abandoned town. I guess cemeteries are pretty much the most haunted places anywhere you go, though, to be fair. Visiting there now, you'll see many coffins just out in the open, with skeletons just sitting there for you to see, bones scatter the area, and this is because there was a lot of looting in the area after the town was abandoned, and some say that at night, the souls of the deceased, angered by the tampering of their graves, rise from their graves. Yeah, I gotta go there. Just the 112th place I have on my list since I started making these videos. Next up, we have the Vampire of Pisco. Now, looking at images of this Peruvian town, I just gotta start by saying, looks lovely. I would definitely visit, but just be warned, you could run into the ghost of a vampire lady if you're not careful. So, our story actually begins in England in 1913, where a woman named Sarah Ellen Roberts had been executed for being a witch. Some say she had even been bitten by Dracula himself and was one of his wives, a vampire witch. That's one dangerous woman. Right before her death, she warned that she would return from her grave in 80 years to exact vengeance. The Church of England believed her corpse to be too cursed to bury on holy ground, so her actual husband, not Dracula, sadly, a man by the name of John Roberts, probably the most average, uninteresting, basic name possible, decided to take her body elsewhere. And John traveled all across Europe. No one would have her. He tried Chile, Argentina, with no luck until his quest eventually landed him in Piso, Peru, where he finally lay her to rest. In 2007, there was a massive earthquake in the town, and one of the few tombs left untouched, Sarah Ellen Roberts. A number of Pisco residents say that on some nights you can still see a ghostly woman wandering the streets. Number 8, the Encantado. The mythical creature is said to stalk the forests of the Amazon, residing in the river. But sometimes they come out at night, often shape-shifting into human form. Their real form is that of a serpent or dolphin-like appearance. They're very attracted to parties or social gatherings, especially if there's music. The Encantado are said to be exceptional musicians in human form, hypnotizing their victims with their musical abilities. Once it has its target in its grasp, it whisks them away, dragging them into the waters of the Amazon, never to be seen or heard from again. If it doesn't decide to take them away, though, these creatures are also known to incite madness or cause illness and death to their victims. So, if you do decide to visit the Amazon and cruise down the majestic river, just be cautious if you happen to come across a beautiful stranger in the dead of night with incredible musical talent.
Moving on to number 7, Ghost. Next we have a story that was actually posted to BuzzFeed, and I will just let them tell their terrifying experience. Quote, "When I was like 5 years old, my parents bought this huge house in a small town. We only lived in the house for 5 months before it unexpectedly burned down. When we first moved in, it was a 2-story creaky old house. I remember feeling uncomfortable there and didn't understand why. I always made sure to stay with someone, never alone. Around 2 weeks before it burned down, I saw a dark shadow walking through the hallway outside of my bedroom. Needless to say, I was terrified. After the house burned down, my stepdad still wanted to make use of the property, so he built a 1-story home. I still felt weird vibes from the new house, but it was not as intense as the old house was. One night when I was only 7 or 8 years old, I woke up, looked straight ahead, and saw a little boy wearing a white shirt with overalls. We made eye contact, and then he disappeared. Fast forward to 10 years later, my younger nephew was having problems sleeping. We all talked to him to figure out why he was reacting this way, and he explained that there was a little boy wearing a white shirt with overalls who kept bothering him and wanted to play. He even said the boy would pretend to shoot at him as if they were playing cops and robbers. In that moment, my blood ran cold. I had never told anyone about my experience. Next up at number 6, Tony and Deborah. In 1992, owners Tony and Deborah Pickman came forward saying that they began experiencing very strange things in their home after the birth of their daughter. What was once a completely normal home was suddenly infested by a demonic entity, covering the couple in scratch marks, cuts, and bruises nearly every day. On top of that, they were seeing full apparitions of the demons, objects floating around their house, and hearing strange demonic noises at all hours of the day. It got so bad they contacted investigators who attempted to reach the spirits and reason with them, but the investigators were also tormented by the entity. Eventually they came to realize that Sally, the house's most active ghost, had died here when she was young from a botched appendectomy. Initially they thought she was the demon, but they found out she had actually become a magnet for dark entities to pass through, almost like a portal for demons to enter their house. By 1994, they had enough and moved out of the horrible house, but have since maintained a website dedicated to their experience there. Moving on to number 5, Latoya Ammons. When Latoya Ammons moved into her quaint home in Gary, Indiana in 2011, she had no clue what was in store for her and her family. According to Latoya, things got bad quickly. The first troubling phenomenon occurred when a huge swarm of large black flies started circling the family's screened-in porch, and only seemed to be multiplying. These flies were relentless, even staying through the winter, and as soon as they arrived, so did the sound of strange footsteps at night. Then one day, Latoya saw a shadow figure walk across her living room, and she began to panic. Something evil was in her home. It all came to a head after Latoya witnessed her unconscious 12-year-old levitating above her bed at 2 a.m., and so she contacted some clairvoyants to try and rid whatever evil spirit was living in her home. According to the paranormal experts, Latoya's home was haunted by an astonishing 200 demons, and was indeed a very dangerous place for her and her family to be living. Latoya decided the best course of action was to undergo exorcisms to rid themselves of anything the demons could have placed on them and flee their home. All I can say is thank God they got out alive. Moving on to number 4, the cage. During the 16th century, this house was used to imprison 12 accused witches, one of whom was the famous Ursula Kemp, who was tragically executed for her so-called witchy ways. Whether that is all coincidence or not is up for debate, but according to the 2004 owner Vanessa Mitchell, it is a very haunted home filled with deep-seated evil. Vanessa claims the demons wasted no time introducing themselves. The first night she moved in, she saw a shadowy figure in the corner and knew right away that something was very wrong. Shortly after, she began to feel harassed by the entity, as it would push when she was home alone, smack her hard enough to leave bruises, and even shoved Vanessa down the stairs. Then she began seeing strange things too. Bloodstains started showing up on the floors all the time, and objects began launching themselves across the room. Whatever it was, it did not want her there. In an interview, she states that during her 3-year time living in the cage, she witnessed 4 ghosts, 2 men and 1 woman, which she claims she once captured on camera. Thankfully, she got out, but the house remains a notorious spot in Essex, frequented by paranormal enthusiasts hoping to catch a glimpse of the evil entity that nearly killed Vanessa. Moving on to number 3. The Armstrong Street House. In 1970, Anne and Roger Brock moved their family into a beautiful 4-bedroom house in Kokomo, Indiana. The family didn't have a ton of money, but they were able to score the house for pretty cheap, which in hindsight could have been a clue. Mere hours after the family moved in, they began to notice oddities like flickering lights, but brushed it off as nothing. Then one night, one of the daughters, Lana, was awoken by sudden shaking. She thought it was an earthquake at first, but then she looked out her window to see a strange man, drenched, staring at her through her bedroom window. Lana freaked out, but then in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Another night, she heard a knock at her door, and assuming it was her parents, she went went to answer it, only to have her mouth covered by an invisible hand. She tried to scream but couldn't. Suddenly her dog appeared and distracted the entity, allowing Lana to scream for help, but this only angered the spirit. To get back at her, it picked up the dog and threw it out the window, sending it plunging to its death. This went on nearly every night. Years later, they learned that someone was killed in the house, which could explain their torment, but still not a single member of the family has ever dared return. Coming in at number 2, the House of Death. Once the home of actress and poet Jan Bryant Bartel in the 60s, this house holds a reputation for housing some of the most demonic entities in all of New York City. Within weeks of moving in, Jan knew something was deeply wrong with the house. She would often feel the touch of an icy hand across the back of her neck or hear footsteps follow her around the empty house. The house always reeked like something was rotting or dying, and her dogs were always barking into nothingness. Then one day, one of her dogs died, as if out of nowhere. So she decided to take matters into her own hands and called a psychic medium. But this only angered the demons. During the first session, the medium went into an unusual trance, speaking about the hundreds of bodies buried underneath the house. And Jan knew it wasn't the medium speaking. It was then that she learned how many people had been killed or taken their own lives while living here. Then all of a sudden, the medium's eyes bulged out of her head and she started shouting that she would never leave in a deep demonic voice. The encounter was enough for Jan to leave and never return. But sadly, a few years later, she published a book about her life in the haunted house just weeks before she took her own life. And last up in our number 1 spot, Janine and AJ. Back in 2013, a couple named Janine and AJ moved into a quaint and sweet little house in Springfield, Louisiana. The hauntings started off small, with their radio turning on all by itself or the lights flickering independently, but soon enough they overheard their son speak to who he described as an imaginary friend late at night, and they heard a strange voice threaten to begin hurting Janine. Before long, Janine was being harmed by the presence, waking up to find bruises and scratches, and would often get pushed around by the demon in the middle of the day. She began noticing that the rosaries she hung were spinning in the house, plaster was falling from the ceiling and missing her by mere inches, and soon she began to seriously fear for her life. One day her and her husband decided to leave out a tape recorder to see if they could get any proof of the demon occupying their house. And sure enough, when they went to check the recorder the next day, they captured growling sounds and the demon saying, "She will die." The last straw was when they moved a rug in one of the rooms, only to discover that the floor had been covered entirely in satanic symbols. Needless to say, they packed up everything and got the hell out of there.
Coming in at number 10 is Monte Cristo Homestead. Monte Cristo Homestead is a historic homestead that was constructed by local pioneer Christopher William Crawley in 1885. It's a double-story late Victorian style manor standing on a hill overlooking the town. While it belonged to the Crawleys, it was riddled with death as a stable boy burnt to death, a girl was thrown down the stairs, a maid lobbed off a balcony, and a caretaker was shot dead, amongst others, so of course this place is haunted. Current owner Olive Ryan says, "I've had a hand on my shoulder, I've had my name called when I've been here by myself, I've heard footsteps on the balcony and gone out and there's no one there." And now all this started just 2 days after moving in, when she saw from a distance beaming bright lights coming from the home, which at the time was only lit by one kerosene lamp. The lights were gone by the time the car made it down the long driveway, she said. Other reported experiences include a medium who was struck in the head, a young girl's separate asthma attack-like episode despite no medical history, several strange occurrences involving animals, and multiple reports of presences, footsteps, and voices from the boarders, visitors, and family members. Number 9. Devil's Pool. According to Aboriginal folklore, a young runaway bride who fell to her death at Devil's Pool is believed to be the reason why so many young men's lives, especially male tourists, have been taken at the site. The legend begins with a young woman named Ulana who married an elder from her own tribe. Yet shortly after they married, she fell in love with another man, Daiga, from a touring tribe. Now it's said that the two lovers, Ulana and Daiga, ran away from their tribes and fled to what is now known as Devil's Pool, where they were captured by the elders. Yet Ulana broke free and leapt into the creek waters, calling for Daiga to follow. She hit the water, crying out for her love Daiga, which shook the water into action. The land vibrated around her, sending boulders containers flying into the creek and causing the water to plunge forward at alarming rates. Now, it said if you listen closely, it's thought you can still hear Ulana's cries for her lost love, according to the indigenous legend. Her curse on the spookily named Devil's Pool, also known as Babinda Boulders in tropical North Queensland, has lingered ever since. Ulana is said to have lured 17 men to a watery grave in the past half-century, remembered with the eerie saying, "He came for a visit and stayed forever." Now, if I were a man, I would not risk going here. Number 8. Quarantine Station. Set up as a vital safeguard in 1833 to prevent immigrants arriving in Australia from spreading diseases to the main settlement in the city, many migrants spent their final days at the compound before succumbing to deadly viruses. Officially, close to 600 people died at the station out of the 26,000 who stayed there between the quarantine site being founded in the 1830s and its closure in the 1980s. Now, the site now operates as a luxury hotel resort, but it is extremely haunted. Hundreds of spirit encounters have occurred over the years, varying from apparitions, people suddenly feeling nauseated and unwell, to objects being moved without any explanation. Several nurses, as well as a spirit known as matron, are said to patrol the hospital ward, while a mortician in a top hat, nicknamed by staff as Mr. Slimy, has been spotted walking around the grounds. A fisherman from China called Mr. Chen often roams around the third-class living quarters, where passengers who were not of a white descent had to live while at the compound. Now, around 20 children are said to haunt the site, but a little boy called Isaac Lowe's is one of the more frequent spirits to be seen.
Next on the list is the Capuchin Catacombs. The Capuchin Catacombs in Palermo, Italy are an extensive underground burial site that houses thousands of mummies. It was built in the 16th century, initially intended for monks, clergy, and other wealthy citizens. Over time, it evolved into this unique burial ground that captured the deceased in various states of preservation. The catacombs consist of long corridors lined with shelves that hold coffins, some containing the deceased in their original clothing. The bodies are arranged in a range of poses, from standing to lying down, creating this eerie spectacle that has intrigued and disturbed visitors for centuries. The catacombs were in use until the 1920s, and the last body was added to the catacombs in 1920. No surprise here, these catacombs are often associated with tales of hauntings. The legend goes that the spirits of the deceased linger within the catacombs, and visitors have reported eerie occurrences, hearing unexplained sounds and whispers. Some have even claimed to see the eyes of the mummies move, or felt a presence guiding them through the dimly lit corridors. There are also stories about specific mummies. Take Rosalina Lombardo, for example, a young woman who appears remarkably well preserved. Some visitors claim to witness Rosalina's eyes opening. And at our number 6 spot is the Museum of Mummies. This place houses a collection of naturally mummified bodies dating back several centuries. The mummies on display were discovered in the nearby catacombs of Santa Maria, where environmental conditions had led to these bodies being exceptionally well preserved. The museum offers visitors a glimpse into the burial practices and customs of the local population from the 19th and early 20th centuries. The bodies are arranged in these open coffins. The mummification process occurred spontaneously due to the specific microclimate within the catacombs, a combination of low humidity and stable temperatures. It's gained a reputation for paranormal activity. Many visitors and locals claim to have experienced supernatural occurrences within the museum's premises. Tales of ghostly apparitions, mysterious footsteps, and unexplained sounds have all been reported. Some speculate that the unique conditions that led to the natural mummification process may have somehow preserved not only the physical bodies, but also the spiritual essence of these individuals. And at number 5 is Evil Tower. The Evil Tower at Castello de Papi in Italy is home to a haunting tale involving the vengeful spirit of Matilda. According to local legend, Matilda met a tragic fate after committing a heinous act. She took the life of her lover right after some intimacy. And that really seemed to tick people off. It was just particularly cruel. I don't think there's ever a good time, necessarily, to end an innocent person's life, but right after getting down with them, probably the worst timing possible. As a consequence of this gruesome crime, she was condemned to the ultimate punishment, a death sentence. The spirit of Matilda is believed to linger within the confines of the evil tower. The tale suggests that her restless soul haunts the grounds, trapped in a perpetual state of anguish and regret. Number 4, the Botanical Garden. The Botanical Garden in Lucca, Italy is said to be haunted by its former owner, Lucida Mansi, a noblewoman with a penchant for dark deeds. Lucida was known for a macabre practice. It's said that she would take the lives of her young lovers by leading them to a trap door equipped with sharp blades, again right after sleeping with them. Legend has it that she was desperate to retain her youthful appearance and sold her soul to the devil in exchange for an additional 30 years of beauty. This unholy pact granted her an extended period of youth, but condemned her to a life steeped in malevolence. The story goes that if you visit the lake within the Botanical Garden and gaze into its waters, putting your face down, you just might witness Lucida's expression reflected back at you, as if she's peering into a mirror, perpetually haunted by the consequences of her sinister choices. At third place, we have Casa del Anime. Casa del Anime, once an inn, has a grim history behind it. The establishment was once owned by a deranged family with a penchant for violence and greed. This family engaged in a horrific method of dispatching some of their more wealthy customers. In this inn, you had your standard rooms, but then there were 2 rooms that were supposedly a bit more luxurious, located at the back of the building, away from the roadside. These rooms were reserved for their more well-to-do guests. The owners seek to profit off of these people, not just by having them pay for a nicer room, but by crushing them to death as well. They would drop massive pieces of furniture onto their unsuspecting victims, crushing them to death in their sleep. After committing that gruesome act, the family would proceed to rob the deceased of their belongings before callously disposing of the bodies. The victims were cast into this large hole on the premises, transformed into a mass grave. After World War II, the inn was inhabited by a different family who soon reported unsettling experiences, claiming to hear the chilling sounds at night of echoes of enormous objects crashing to the floor and clattering of crockery. To this day, Casa del Anime is said to be haunted by the tortured spirits of those who met their tragic end within its walls. Number 2, Castello di Fenis. Castello di Fenis is a historic castle dating back to the 14th century. It was constructed by the Chaland family. While the castle is open to visitors today, there are areas that remain restricted, and it's believed that these sections are teeming with the lingering spirits of past residents. Reports from those touring the castle describe unsettling occurrences. Disembodied voices are said to reverberate down the empty halls. Spectral figures dressed in medieval attire have been spotted drifting through the towers and along the battlements, only to vanish without a trace. One particularly haunting tale involves a ghostly figure associated with a man who was known to play the violin. Story goes that this musician mysteriously disappeared one day, leaving his violin case behind, and some visitors claim to hear the haunting strains of a violin playing within the castle, as if the ghostly musician continues to serenade the halls from beyond the grave. Finally, we have Villa Magnoni, said to be haunted by a witch. Villa Magnoni is an abandoned house situated in the quiet village of Cona. The windows of this eerie residence are now walled up, except for one. The place has sat abandoned for years, but one day in the late 80s, a group of young men decided to explore the abandoned house. They managed to break in, and once inside, they all started looking at each other, confused and incredibly unsettled. They were all hearing the unmistakable sound of children singing. It was coming from the garden, but when they went to look, there was nobody there. to their horror, the men looked up to discover an old woman scolding and insulting them from a floor above, cursing and yelling at them to leave. They scrambled away from the abandoned property, tearing off in their car, but not long after they'd hit the road, they were involved in a horrific car accident. 3 of them lost their lives in the crash, leaving only 1 survivor behind. After this incident, villagers sealed off the windows of the house, but weeks later, the covering on one particular window, the very one where the old woman had appeared, was found mysteriously uncovered.
Number 10. Satan's Castle, San Bernardino. Yes, this place is called Satan's Castle, and it's a no from me. Satan's Castle sits on a mountainous region that is filled with both religious and satanic lore dating back to the 19th century. There are said to be underground tunnels linking to various points of interest across the mountain, which were used during the Prohibition era. These tunnels were created mostly for transportation and smuggling booze, but also served for darker purposes. One of these tunnels is rumored to connect a Catholic church to Satan's Castle. It is said to have been the grounds for dark, ritualistic practices which included both human and animal sacrifices, along with other dark ceremonies. Not to mention, inside one of the rooms, a pentagram used to be painted on the ground. Local Christians painted over it with the John 3:16 verse, but the pentagram always bled through. Definitely sounds satanic to me, and I will not be visiting there. Number 9. Preston Castle, Ione. The Preston School of Industry, also known as Preston Castle, was a reform school that opened in June 1894 and was considered one of the oldest and best known reform schools in the United States. The boys there grew their own food, raised livestock, and learned farming trades. Additionally, there was a print shop, bakery, and cobbler shop where the boys could learn skills for self-preservation in the real world. The superintendent controlled the life inside the school, and discipline was extreme. Starvation, isolation, and public paddling and lashings, and severe strategies were common at Preston. Now, this school has seen a lot of death. There are 17 men buried on the school grounds because they died there. Samuel Goins had his life ended after attempting to escape from the school. In 1950, Preston's head housekeeper, Anna Corbin, was beaten to death in the school's basement as well, and they never found out who did it. Employees and visitors believe that these young men are still haunting the school, which only closed in 1960, by the way. Those who have toured the grounds since have reported many strange sights and sounds, slamming doors, falling objects, disembodied voices, and ghostly physical contact. Number 8. Camp Pendleton, Area 41, San Diego. Camp Pendleton is a coastal Marine Corps base with a dark history. This place is divided up into sections, and Area 41 is haunted. Locks have been tampered with, furniture displaced, items gone missing, and strange noises are heard throughout the camp. Many think that this is done by one broken-hearted Marine in particular. This man was in love and had recently asked his girlfriend to marry him. After she had said yes, he thought his life was going great, but it didn't last long. The Marine was in his housing unit when his fiancée got a hold of him and told him that she was ending the relationship. He was so upset that he ended his life in a second-story room of the barracks. Now, some Marines are convinced his spirit remains in the area and haunts Area 41 in particular. A general feeling of unease is common here, and to this day, Marines claim that they hear the faint sound of a man softly humming the Jeopardy game show theme song around the grounds. I'm sorry. What? Number 7. Old Helensburgh Railway Tunnel. Sitting just south of Sydney is Old Helensburgh Railway Tunnel, said to be the home of a ghost of a miner, Robert Hales, who died in 1895. He'd been walking home along the short 80-meter-long tunnel after a long day at work. A steam train raced along the tracks from behind and hit the hapless miner. The force of the impact was so great that his body was ripped in two, with each half scattered meters apart. Now, as far as the legend goes, the ghost of Mr. Hales still still haunts the tunnel as a mischievous spirit, chases after trains, and even runs through tourists. A lot of people say they had experienced weird stuff in there, seeing things, sensations, someone watching them, a ghost tour guide, Craig Bloxham said. Number 6. Picton. Being the most haunted town in Australia, Picton is also known for its countryside views and paranormal gardens. The town is located about 80 kilometers southwest of Sydney and has had a historical significance due to its buildings and railway tunnels. The Mushroom Tunnel, also known as former Red Bank Range Railway, is a haunted tunnel as the stories say that there was a terrible railway accident involving a woman named Emily Bollard. The reports suggest people often witness Emily and 2 other women ghosts and also hear some scary voices, crying, and shrieks. Many people have also reported a sudden drop of temperature, eerie shadows, a gust of winds, orbs, body chills, and many weird happenings inside the tunnel. Number 5. Princess Theatre. In the late 1880s, a local opera singer named Fred Baker, seeing failure in his performances, renamed himself as Federici and posed as a European singer. After this, people started flocking to theaters to hear this exotic singer. Now in March 1888, while he was completing a show at the Princess Theatre, Federici hit a high note as he was descending on the stage on a platform. It was at this time that he had a heart attack and died on the spot. His death was witnessed by a stagehand. When the other actors found out about his abrupt death, they were shocked as they swore he had been on stage with them after the final curtain to bask in applause sometime after he had already died. Since then, it's rumored that the theater is haunted by his ghost, and there have been numerous reported sightings of Federici's ghost over the years by performers and staff. Now, rather than trying to expel him from the theater, it was tradition to reserve him a seat in the theater's 3rd row so he can watch the performances amongst the audience. Number 4. National Film and Sound Archive. Before it was the National Film and Sound Archive, this building was the Australian Institute of Anatomy, where it housed hundreds of human skeletons and body parts and animal specimens, including Farlap's heart, Ned Kelly's skull, and a mummy from Papua New Guinea. Staff in recent years have witnessed objects moving by themselves and weird noises coming from recording booths, which once served as dissection labs. The foyer of the building is lined with 9 busts of famous Australians. Now, when these Australians will pop out as an apparition from time to time, it's said that people will be out in the building in the late afternoon and they see an outline of an elderly man, dressed well, and he comes out of the wall near where his ashes are. Now, he doesn't move much and then suddenly sucks back into where the ashes are behind the wall. Number 3. Fremantle Prison. Originally known as the Convict Establishment, the Fremantle Prison was built by convicts between 1852 and 1859 using limestone quarried on site. During its period of operation, the prison housed the majority of the state's thieves and rogues, as well as people who ended others' lives, and during both world wars, it was used by the Australian Army as a military prison for prisoners of war. In its time as a jail, 44 people were executed at its gallows. Now, just one of them was a woman, Martha Rendell. Martha was convicted of ending the lives of 3 of her offspring, and legend has it that her face occasionally appears in the chapel window. Now, the sound of rattling keys, disembodied footsteps, and voices haunt the building as well, as any visitors who take pictures with the gallows tend to appear headless when they look at it after. Now, cameras tend to fail, there are orbs and strange light anomalies, flying bin lids, and funny smells. Several guards claim to have seen the apparition of a man in black, and one of them even fainted when he laid eyes on the figure. Now, no one knows who he is or why he's there, and that is just terrifying. Number 2. Central Railway Station. While tens of thousands of commuters may pass through Central Station as they make their way to work every day, deep beneath the platforms is a hidden world. Abandoned tunnels snake underground and have sat unused for decades. Stripped bare but largely still intact, platforms 26 and 27 were built in the 1970s on the site of the old Devonshire Street Cemetery. The bodies laying in the graveyard were reburied across the city decades before the station was built, but workers recently inspecting the unused platform have reported some eerie experiences. Sydney train officials have reported hearing voices echoing against the walls, and even the sounds of children playing. Director of Operations with Sydney Trains Tony Eade also claims to have heard the sound of children's voices on a visit to station's never-used tunnels. He previously said workers down here said they would hear kids playing and, thinking they were vandals, would go and investigate. On one occasion, I was down here with a radio crew and we all heard children playing. Take that as you you wish, but we all heard it. And coming in at number 1 is Arundel Mental Hospital. Arundel Mental Hospital was an Australian psychiatric hospital where construction began in 1864 and was opened for patients in 1867. Now, with a building this old and with walls that have seen so many horrors, it is not a shock that this place is haunted. It was finally closed as an asylum in 1993, and at its height, Arundel had 1,000 patients and is a large complex with up to 70 interesting historic abandoned buildings. While reports exist of apparitions, phantom sounds, visitors experiencing nausea, fainting, and pain, some ghosts from Arundel's past have made themselves known to those who are alive today. Now, J Ward is one of the most haunted places, as visitors report feeling ill and suddenly afraid. Others slip into a trance, only released from it when they exit the building. Some people have even been bitten or pushed while walking through J Ward, and the ward is also said to be haunted by 3 prisoners who were hanged and buried on the property. They are said to be restless because they weren't given a proper burial, and their graves are only marked with 3 scratches on the prison wall. Apparitions have also been seen in the women's ward donning old-time nurses' uniforms and disappearing into stone walls.
Then we're starting things off with Greco. This commune in the southern Italian region of Basilicata now stands as a ghost town. Dilapidated homes, crumbling walls, and remnants of a once vibrant community now stand frozen in time, and there have been rumors of hauntings surrounding the place for decades. Greco's history can be traced back to the 8th century, with the settlement evolving over the centuries into a thriving community. But various natural disasters like earthquakes and landslides forced the residents to abandon their homes in the mid-20th century. The final exodus took place in 1963 when the government deemed the town unsafe to live in. Greco, or whatever's left of it now, still stands today, and those empty houses and deserted streets have fueled countless legends of hauntings and supernatural occurrences. Visitors have reported strange sounds and ghostly apparitions. Some attribute these phenomena to the tragic events that led to the town's abandonment. One popular tale revolves around the Church of Santa Maria della Stella. According to the locals, the church is haunted by the ghost of a nun who allegedly died under mysterious circumstances. Visitors claim to have heard footsteps, whispers, and even seen the ghostly figure wandering through the crumbling aisles. At our number 9 spot, we have Poveglia. The small island located in the Venetian lagoon of northern Italy is said to be one of the most haunted places in the country. The origins of Poveglia date back to the Roman era, but it got its sinister reputation during the bubonic plague. The island became a quarantine station for ships arriving in Venice, and later a dumping ground for those afflicted by the plague. Thousands of bodies were unceremoniously dumped into mass graves. Then, in 1922, the island was repurposed as a mental hospital. And mental hospitals in the 1920s were not anything like the types of facilities that we get today. These institutions were pretty much hell on earth. It operated for several decades, with rumors circulating about questionable medical practices and mistreatment of patients. The hospital was eventually closed in 1968, and Poveglia was left abandoned, a dumping ground for bubonic plague victims and the site of a horrific mental hospital. Yeah, no wonder people think this place is still messed up. Those who have had the clearance to go to the island have reported hearing disembodied voices, screams, and footsteps echoing through the dilapidated structures. Some claim to have seen apparitions of plague victims and disturbed spirits roaming the abandoned hospital wards. Access to the island is restricted. The Italian government has prohibited public entry, and trespassers risk legal consequences, and that just makes the place more alluring, doesn't it? Number 8, Casa Dario in Venice. The Venetian Gothic Palace in Venice is one of the most haunted buildings in the city. There have been a series of misfortunes that have befallen many of its owners throughout the years. It was constructed in the 15th century, and architecturally, it's beautiful. Despite this aesthetic appeal, though, the palace has earned a dark reputation because of a series of tragedies that have plagued its owners. The belief in a curse surrounding Dario has persisted for centuries. The first owner to fall victim to misfortune was Giovanni Dario, the original commissioner of the palace. Legend has it that he went bankrupt during the construction, leading to financial ruin. Future owners faced similar fates, with a series of bankruptcies, untimely deaths, and family tragedies. One of these former owners was Charles Briggs, an Englishman who purchased the palace in the 19th century. After acquiring Cadario, Briggs lost his wife and daughter. The next owner, a ballet dancer named Rolf von Bockelmann, also met an untimely end shortly after acquiring the property. Next on the list, we have the Recoleta Cemetery in Argentina. This Buenos Aires cemetery has quite the storied history, with several notable Argentines having been buried there. One of the more harrowing tales tells of Rufina Cambaceres, who met a gruesome end at the cemetery. Honestly, this is one of my absolute worst fears. Rufina had a privileged life. She was born into a wealthy family. She was popular. She really lived it up. But unfortunately, it was short-lived. In 1902, she suddenly collapsed and was pronounced dead at only 19 years of age. She was placed in a coffin, and she was sealed at a mausoleum at this cemetery. But just a few days after her funeral, a graveyard worker was in her crypt and noticed that her coffin was slightly ajar. As to why he was in the crypt, I don't really know. I don't know what crypt keepers do. I tried to look it up. All I got were descriptions of the 90s Crypt Keeper series. Great show, but not really what I'm looking for, so let me know in the comments if you know. Anyway, the man opened her coffin and to his horror saw that there were scratch marks on it. Rufina had been buried alive, essentially. Some say that her shadowy figure still roams through this cemetery at night. Number 6, the Rosario Mine. This mine, located in the Cerro Rico mountain in Potosi, Bolivia, is exceptionally dangerous. For centuries, miners have descended into the bowels of the earth, braving treacherous conditions in search of silver and other valuable minerals. The working environment is pretty harsh, with cramped and unstable tunnels, limited ventilation, and this constant threat of collapse. Miners work long hours, physically demanding labor, often exposed to harmful dust and toxic fumes, leading to health issues and a shortened life expectancy if they don't die in the mine. Over the centuries, millions of miners have met their end here, but despite all that, the nature of the job continues today, and with all the deaths that have taken place there, it's no surprise that many of the miners believe it to be haunted by the spirits of those who perished in its depths. And many of them claim to have experienced eerie and unexplainable phenomenon within the dark confines of this mine. Miners often pay homage to El Tío, the god of the underworld, whose altar sits at the entrance to the mine. Miners offer cigarettes, alcohol, cocoa leaves to El Tío in hopes of receiving protection and good fortune. And at number 5, we have the Huelma building in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Today, the Huelma building stands, but it's the site of a very tragic incident which took place in 1974. One of the deadliest high-rise fires in history. It was a morning like any other until an air conditioner on the 12th floor short-circuited, engulfing the entire floor in flames, which quickly spread to the rest of the building. Within 20 minutes, the entire building was on fire. Firemen rushed to the scene, but tragically, their ladders could only reach the 15th floor, so everyone above all burnt to death in the flames. And when the dust settled, it was determined that an estimated 179 people lost their lives. While making their way through the torched building, authorities found 13 bodies trapped in the elevator. They had been burnt so badly that they were completely unrecognizable and were never identified. Their bodies were buried in the Sao Pedro cemetery, and some tell stories of hearing moans and cries of agony coming from their unmarked graves. Number 4, Paso Alberti stations in Buenos Aires. The A line in Buenos Aires is the oldest subway in Latin America, completed in 1913. Building the line was a massive undertaking that tragically claimed the lives of many workers there, including Salvador Vaca and Antonio Salas, were Italian immigrants whose deaths were initially hidden as accidents, but later revealed to be due to pure negligence. Some think that their spirits, along with others who met their ends during the construction, wander through the tracks at night. Some have reported hearing footsteps and catching glimpses of these ghoulish faces passing by the windows as the train speeds down the tunnels. People claim to see white translucent figures in the dark tunnels of these abandoned tracks, and some workers have even witnessed security cameras mysteriously turning off at night only to capture this eerie white figure when turned back on. Phantom Bride in her white gown is said to kind of roam the tunnels, and it leads to speculation that maybe she was abandoned at the altar or met a tragic fate on her wedding day, perhaps throwing herself onto the tracks. Who knows? Number 3, we have the Castillo San Cristobal in San Juan, Puerto Rico. This one has something of a tragic love story behind it. That's exactly what it is. This military base was built by the Spanish during the Inquisition. The executioner at the base had a daughter, Maria Dolores, who ended up falling in love with a thief named Bentoncourt. Bentoncourt was eventually arrested for his crimes and sentenced to death, and who executed the man? Maria's very own father, of course. And Maria was unaware of her lover's death until she discovered his remains in the gallows one day. She was so heartbroken and devastated that she ended up taking her own life right there and then. It's said that lovers' spirits still haunt this former military base till this very day. And coming in at our number 2 spot, I'm sure you've all heard of this one, the Island of Dolls in Mexico City. And yes, Mexico, not technically South America, alright, but it's close. Plus, is there anything more unsettling to look at than a doll? Maybe multiple dolls. Now hang them all from trees in a forest. No surprise why this is one of the most famous creepy locations on the planet. The Island of Dolls in Mexico City's Xochimilco canals, that's a pretty eerie sight. It's covered with dolls hanging from trees and scattered about. It's their dead eyes and messed up faces. Story goes that a man named Don Julian Santana Barrera started hanging the dolls in order to appease the spirit of a drowned girl they found in the canal. Lots of people think that the island is now haunted. They say the dolls move their heads, whisper, and make spooky sounds. The Island of Dolls has become quite a tourist attraction. Some say the place feels like you're being watched by these ghostly forces. And finally, we have the Casa Matusita. Lima's Casa Matusita is a haunted residence that instills fear in people for a pretty good reason. It's got some dark history that dates back to Peru's colonial period, when a woman of Persian descent became its first notable resident. Accused of witchcraft during the Spanish Inquisition, she was sentenced to death and cursed the land before burning at the stake. And so things only got worse when a wealthy and cruel landlord built a large home on this cursed plot of land. He mistreated his staff, and he unknowingly pushed them to seek revenge during a high-profile dinner party. The staff spiked guests' drinks with hallucinogenic, but their prank kind of backfired tragically when the guests started brutally massacring each other. Decades later, the Matusita family moved in, setting up a business on the first floor, and a violent incident occurred when Mr. Matusita discovered his wife in bed with another dude, causing the man to snap, take the life of his wife, her lover, and finally himself.
At number 10 is the Gavea Hippodrome. The Gavea Hippodrome in Brazil is famous for being seriously spooky. Back when they built it in the early 1900s, workers faced strange shadows and accidents during construction, leading some to believe that angry ghosts were disturbed from their resting place. The eerie occurrences continued even after construction ended. Shadows lurked around, workers mysteriously fell, and machines broke for no apparent reason. Some folks reckon that angry ghosts were mad about the construction on their resting spot. Even today, it's still creepy. People visiting or working there say they've seen ghostly figures in jockey outfits. But get this, it's not just a haunted spot, it's also where horse betting happens. Surprisingly, it's the only legitimately legal place for gambling in Brazil. So, while ghosts might be around, luck might just be on your side when you're betting at this place. At number 9 is Minas Gerais Cambucria, the Grand Hotel. I totally butchered that. It's got quite a spooky reputation. Room number 204 there is like the epicenter of all the creepy stuff. People who stayed there talk about feeling an eerie cold, hearing knocks on the door with no one around, and even seeing things that don't quite add up. I mean, it's not just 1 or 2 stories, there are multiple accounts of these strange happenings. Visitors have reported seeing things they can't explain, hearing noises that don't make sense, and feeling a weird vibe all around that place. The Grande Hotel seems to have this mysterious aura that makes people think twice about staying there. It's like something out of the horror movies, but hey, if you're into that kind of spooky stuff, maybe it's a place worth checking out if you dare. If you're enjoying this video so far, you can support this channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing the notification bell, all of which is free! At number 8 is the Jolma Building. The Jolma Building in Brazil is known for being seriously spooky. Back in 1975, a huge fire tore through this 25-story building in just under 20 minutes. maintenance because of an electrical problem. It was tragic. Over 486 people had lost their lives in the fire. Even after it was rebuilt and renamed Praca de Banderia, eerie things just kept happening. People say they've spotted ghosts wandering around the halls and rooms, but what's even creepier is the story about the 13 souls who got stuck in the elevator during the fire. Some believe that these spirits are still hanging around, adding to the haunted vibe of the place. If you're someone who gets scared easily, this might not be the best spot for a visit. The history and the story surrounding this building are enough to make your hair stand on end.
Number 7. The Hotel de Coriando, San Diego. Hotel de Coriando is a historic hotel that opened in 1888. Kate Morgan has haunted this hotel since 1892, the year she checked in and awaited the arrival of her husband. The two were traveling con artists, and not surprisingly, her husband never showed up, and 4 days later, Kate was found dead at the bottom of an outdoor staircase leading to the Coronado Beach. Today, those who check into Kate's room, which is now room 3312, have had spooky experiences to say the least. Curtains blowing even though the windows are closed, objects moved by unseen hands, murmuring sounds, and even sightings of Kate walking down the hallways and peering out the windows have all been reported. Her ghost is often seen both in the hotel and on the beach. Now room 3519, formerly room 3502, is also haunted. Once a maid's room, it's been the site of numerous paranormal occurrences, such as objects moving around by themselves. Number 6. The Whaley House, San Diego. The Whaley House is the oldest brick structure in Southern California and was the home of Thomas Whaley and his family. At various times, it also housed Whaley's General Store, San Diego's second county courthouse, and the first commercial theater in San Diego. The house has witnessed more history than any other building in the city, and it is extremely haunted. One of the most infamous ghosts there is the spirit of Yankee Jim Robinson. Yankee Jim was hanged in the gallows where the house now stands in 1852 after being convicted of stealing horses. Thomas Whaley himself, who owned and lived in the house with his family years later, said they could hear heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs. Now visitors have reported cold spots and the feeling of their chest and throat tightening within the home. Others claim to have seen Yankee Jim too, an apparition that appears and disappears when you get too close. Today, and for many years, visitors to the house have also reported seeing Thomas. They usually see him wearing a frock coat and pantaloons standing on the second-story landing. Others have seen his wife Anna, usually floating around in the garden or the downstairs room. Her ghost, which appears white and billowy, seems to just drift about and then disappears. Number 5. Winchester Mystery House, San Jose. Now after finding out what this place is, I really want to visit here. I mean, just by the name Mystery House, it's cool. Now some backstory on the house: Sarah Winchester lived a tragic yet interesting life. She married William Wirt Winchester in 1862, who was a very wealthy man. Sadly though, her husband, mother, and father-in-law all passed away within the same year. To deal with her grief, she moved to California after gaining a large inheritance from her husband. Then on top of all of that, Sarah was being haunted by the spirits of those whose lives were ended by the Winchester rifle, which her husband's company had invented. After her husband passed away, a psychic told her to evade the spirits, she would need to move out west, buy a home, and build non-stop. She took 36 years to construct the home, and this house has 6 kitchens, 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows, 17 chimneys, 160 rooms, and many doors and stairs that lead to nowhere. Workers and visitors swear they hear howling at night, loud creaking, and sometimes the kitchen smells like someone is actively cooking. But regardless if you believe in ghosts or not, the house is absolutely stunning. Number 4. Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, Los Angeles. The Hollywood Roosevelt is considered to be one of the most haunted hotels in Los Angeles. It first opened its doors in 1927 and was a frequent home to Marilyn Monroe, who often stayed in the second floor cabana. Interestingly, the doors to this hotel are still open, allowing visitors to spend the night in Marilyn's suite, and some people claim to have seen Marilyn's ghost smiling and blowing kisses at them in their hotel mirrors. Hotel workers often talk about seeing the ghost of Charlie Chaplin and feel temperatures drop quickly from one room to the next. The apparition of Montgomery Clift has been blamed for patting guests' shoulders and watching maids in room 928, where he stayed for 3 months while filming From Here to eternity. The ghost of Carol Lombard has also been spotted floating around the upper floors, and in the Blossom Room where the first Oscars were held, 2 ghosts have been spotted, a presence of a tuxedoed man and a presence of a man in a white suit. Seems like if you want to meet a dead celebrity, the Roosevelt Hotel is the place to go. Number 3. Alcatraz, San Francisco Bay. The famous maximum security prison Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary earned a reputation as one of the most brutal and inhumane prisons in the country during its day. The strong currents around the island and cold water temperatures made escape nearly impossible, and the prison became one of the most notorious in American history. The prison closed in 1963, and the island is now a major tourist attraction. A total of 36 prisoners made 14 escape attempts, 23 were caught alive, 6 had their lives ended by guards during their escape, 2 drowned, and 5 are listed as missing and presumed drowned. Now, during its 29 years in use, Alcatraz held some of the most notorious American criminals, including Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Bumpty Johnson. Today, it's a tourist attraction that many believe to be haunted. Inexplicable events happen, like the sound of someone playing the banjo. Many believe this to be the spirit of Al Capone, who spent his last days at the prison playing a banjo in the shower room to avoid being injured in the yard. The smell of smoke, the sounds of cell doors slamming, disembodied voices, moaning, and screams have also all been reported. Number 2. Queen Mary, Long Beach. Queen Mary is a retired British ocean liner that sailed from 1936 to 1967. She sailed to the port of Long Beach, California, where she is permanently docked. The city of Long Beach bought the ship to serve as a tourist attraction, featuring restaurants, a museum, and a hotel, but claims were made that the ship was haunted. There are resident spirits, including Jackie, the little girl who haunts the first-class pool, John Petter, who was crushed by a watertight door, Senior Second Officer William Eric Stark, who accidentally drank dry cleaning fluid instead of gin, and the cook, who was baked alive by his own kitchen staff during World War II. But most arguably, the most notorious location on the ship for paranormal activity is room B340. Reports claim someone was knocking on the door in the middle of the night, bathroom lights turning on by themselves, the sink faucet turning on and off on its own, and unexplained bathroom doors shutting. Some guests have reported the covers of their bed being pulled off while asleep and waking to see a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed. There are even more stories about this place, but I don't have enough time to fit them all in. If you're really interested in Queen Mary, I say do some homework on it because it definitely gets creepier. And coming in at number 1 is the Cecil Hotel, Los Angeles. The Cecil Hotel opened in 1925 as a well-furnished hostelry frequented by respectable people, but that didn't last long. As downtown became more and more dangerous, the Cecil became a place where bad people stayed, like the Night Stalker aka Richard Ramirez and Austrian killer Jack Unterweger spent time there. The Black Dahlia was rumored to have had her last drink at the hotel bar before she turned up dead a few miles away. In 1962, Pauline Otten jumped from the 9th floor window, ending her life. That same year, Julia Moore jumped from an 8th floor window, and Helen Green from the 7th floor in 1954. The Cecil Hotel may have rebranded itself recently as the Stay on Main, but it just can't shake its reputation as a place where scary things happen. In 2013, the body of Canadian tourist Elisa Lam was found in the hotel's rooftop cistern. Her body was discovered by a hotel maintenance worker investigating complaints of flooding and low water pressure. And yes, people had been showering in and drinking that water. Ugh. And last but not least, the ghost of a boy has reportedly been photographed outside a 4th floor window. Spooky.